Hello, welcome to Cerulean Arts Gallery. Tonight we're speaking with Phil Carroll in conjunction with his Cerulean Arts Collective Exhibition, which is on view now through June 29th. Hello, Phil.
How are you? How you doing, Michael?
Good. Thanks for being here tonight.
No problem. It's a lot of fun.
So, so this is your first Cerulean show.
Yes.
So how do you feel about that?
I think it's wonderful. I love the gallery and the camaraderie between all the artists and in the gallery. It's fantastic. And it's really nice to see all the other artists' work and to show with them.
So okay, we're going to move through your show. So give us a little bit of background about yourself.
Um, Studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. I was class of 1983. Almost hate to say that. That was so long ago. And I teach art now just at Perkins Center for the Arts. I've taught at other places, but I prefer to stay there. And then I was their curator for about 15 years, where we ran two different sites, one in Collingswood and the other in Morristown, the galleries. So I have vast experience as you do, hanging work on walls and
Yeah.
dealing with artists. And it's mostly fun, you know. But
Yes.
I'm an artist too, so I know how we can be at times.
So tell us then about your work. What's your artistic vision, philosophy?
I love to do still lifes and landscapes. Um, I do a number of landscapes in New Jersey. I've spent the last few years doing work up in Maine, traveling up and down and renting places and just staying for a week or two and finding spots to paint. And then I also get to go up because my niece has a place in Cape Elizabeth, right outside of Portland. So we can go there and stay if we like as well. It's more of it. My parents went to Maine when we were young, but we didn't go with them. Um, and I've always wanted to go back up there and start painting again. And so I go between the two places from here
So do
to,
you paint in the landscape?
yeah, I go up. When I go up, I'll spend a couple hours in the morning, 2, 3 hours in the morning, and then break for a while, and then go in the afternoon. And I'm picking out spots that I want to go to, but I do plein air watercolor. I don't do oils. It's just too much paraphernalia to bring with you. So I'll do studies while I'm there very quickly. And I also take photographs so I can remember what the areas look like and refer to them as well. But I always like to have that study because it's that initial, response to a scene that I like to look back on. And that's a painting that was up in Machias, Maine, which is all the way up at the top of Maine, about half an hour from Canadian border. It's just a beautiful place up there. It's one of my favorite spots to go.
So what is
That
it about the landscape that attracts you?
I just like the rustic aspect of it, and I love the coastline, um, and all those little villages, fishing villages. But I haven't really painted that much of the fishing villages. A couple of them. Um, I've done watercolors of them and whatnot, and I'm just fascinated by the rocks and like a piece like this, like Shari, which was up in Port Clyde. We rented a place up there for about a week, and that was down the coast while I was searching out, looking for things to paint. So I was down there doing studies of that, and then brought it back, did another more complete watercolor, and then did this painting, which is in oil of it from the studies I did from the photographs. But the thing is, I mean, I take and change these paintings a tremendous amount. Put things in, I take things out. I put more rocks in maybe than there are, rearrange things. So they're not an exact copy of something that's there. That just starts with the images that I look at, and then I just develop the painting from that point on. There's a couple of same place, that one on either side of on the left and the right are from Maine as well. That's up in Port Clyde as well. What's interesting is this spot, which was unbeknownst to me when we rented the place. It's on Horse Lane, I think it is, or Horsehead Lane, I forget. And I was walking down the beach, and this section here, when it's low tide, you can get around it. Two doors down from us was the NC Wyeth home that he had owned when he first started going to Maine. And it was kind of neat to
Oh,
be a couple of doors down from that. And I wandered up. I didn't go on the property because there was someone there, but this is beginning of part of his property that runs back towards where we were staying.
huh, that's amazing.
That's a piece fluffing. That one, there are no studies outside because it was probably about 10 degrees. And I just captured some photographs and then went back, did some drawings at my studio. And I just found it an interesting pose because I don't often see them from behind like that. And the reason it's called fluffing is in the wintertime to keep warm, they fluff their feathers up standing on that ice. And he had his head tucked in and turned just perfectly. So I was in the right spot at the right time. And I know that I've done geese before, but most of the time you're doing from the side or a different pose or from the front. And this was just fascinating to me with this pose that really caught my eye. That's
Yeah,
kind
it's
of,
very unusual.
yeah. And you always get that question, is why from behind? I go, well, because that was the interesting, that's what I was interested in. That was the fun thing. It was different than just looking at a Canada goose that you see everybody do, floating
Right.
in a pond or
Yeah,
walking
right.
through the park. That's another one. That's that same stretch of beach at a different time as the one that we had just shown. And that was in it was late afternoon, early morning is when this one was. And it's just, I just enjoy the coastline. I find it funny. One of my students said she was looking at these paintings and she said, how come everything is always to the left or the right? And I said, well, because I'm standing on the coastline. And if I'm faced left, looking north, landscape's on the left. If I'm facing south, the landscape's on the right. And I said, I do some other things in between, but it's the coastline that fascinates me the most, with the water and the rocks and everything that goes on there, and the beautiful trees and the pines.
So do you feel your time at the academy gave you a good grounding in the
Yes.
art
Yes.
fundamentals?
It was nice because I was there um, at a time when it was really all about art. It was about, you knew that probably you were going to have to do a fair amount of teaching for a living, and that was okay, but you're going to be able to hopefully support yourself and create the art that you wanted to. It was also a time when you had really influential people there, like the Bo Bartlett and Vince Desiderio, and at the time no one knew how influential they would become. Bo was pretty famous, and a lot of other artists, Paul Dussault, who I went to school with. It was a really exciting time, and we were still in the old building, the old hotel on Chestnut Street. And then towards the end, that's when they moved over towards my last year. They moved over towards the old funeral home. And that's when things began to change a little bit. And that changed the dynamic between artists. It became a little bit more distant. So, but like I said, I was towards the end of coming out of there anyway. That's a still life called nesting. I actually was setting up a still life for my students. And I only had a couple pairs in it. So I made up, there was only the two pairs, the one in front of the nest and the other. And I put that cloth underneath. And then I made up all the other pairs that are in the painting just to balance it out. But the cloths, the rugs, or something that I just started to recently add. And they're a lot of fun to do. They look a little bit, actually, that's less difficult, I find, because I get so into the stippling of it than doing the rest of the rest of the still life or the painting. And that's really the intricate part at the bottom. That's a rug I borrowed from my sister. I haven't given it back to her yet, but she hasn't asked. So I don't know that I want to give it back now because I may use it again.
It's famous now.
That's a little, I have like hundreds of objects, and I just started going back to doing little intricate paintings, putting the objects in small boxes and then setting them up so I can look at them and paint them next to my easel. It's sometimes an eclectic group of different things, but it's one of the things I love to do the most, and that's kind of how I started doing still life. It was very intimate, just at first single objects, and then adding two or three different things, and then thinking about the atmosphere that's around them.
So are there artists from history or contemporary that you think about?
Um, you know what? When I growing up as a young artist, I thought I was an impressionist, so I was very much into plein air, Monet, Cezanne. That's where the still lifes kind of come in, and uh, Walter Murch, who's from Canada,
Yes.
other painters like that. I mean, I do love Wyeth too, but I mean, I just love him because of the way he approaches work. Um, there's so many. It's really hard to pin just one down at a certain point. This was a painting that was interesting because that box of flowers, I bought flowers in a pot, and I took that back to I used those flowers for my students for a still life, and they sat on the dining room table for about a week, and I kept passing it by until I finally decided, oh, that might make an interesting still life. And it started off with just the table that it's seated on, and the same rug as the other painting, in the box, and I had done that. And lots of times with paintings like this, there isn't a really set idea. I come up with a concept like those three items in the middle, and the rest just kind of falls into place as I work. Where that little bird is, there was another bird that was going to come around the corner, and I erased him. He just didn't work very well. And that's something that I begin to put in works in the last few years. Not every piece it's still like, but putting in birds and playing with the atmosphere with those things flying around, or and that this was done just around Mother's Day. That's why I called it Mother's Day. Oh, and then I gave them to my wife to plant in the garden. So a few of them survived, which was really nice. But I did buy her other flowers for Mother's Day, so I was safe. I wasn't just buying them for a class and then handing them to her. But yeah, even little things like the bird and the chick and stuff, that's I sit down and just do little drawings and try to figure out how those things will fit. And I was looking at little chickens. I don't know if it has any, so I had to go look up some online and then kind of develop my own little guy seated right there.
So you've taught a long time. How does that affect your art making?
It's interesting. I think that you learn just about as much from your students as hopefully you teach them. The difficulty becomes I've had students for 10, 15 years or longer, and I keep asking them why they come back. And they tell me they love me, and they're always learning something new, which I must be doing something right. But um, I sometimes I'll take things like this, even this piece. I did this exact same thing with them in class, and sometimes the things I'm thinking about painting, I'll take them images or the objects themselves and let them do a painting. And it's kind of fun because I see interpretations that then even I can steal a little bit of the way that they approach them. So there's a really nice give and take when you're teaching people, and it makes you feel good. They appreciate it. This was one that drove me nuts, Michael. I thought, oh, how hard can it be to do asparagus? Well, I found out. And I must have painted the top of this 3 or 4 times and wiped it out until I finally went several times and bought asparagus, and I kept looking at how it was put together. So it's my interpretation of the way it looks, but it I kept looking at all the masters paintings and other people's and all these asparagus straight up and down, but I thought that just wouldn't satisfy me. So I wanted to add the rope in the bowl. Um, it was a funny painting while I was painting it, and when I finally got down the asparagus, I was really, it's like, okay, good, finally a breath of fresh air. And I began to look at it. And I don't know if you remember, there's that old saying when we were kids, that whether you everyone through it's with the hands where you do, here's the church and there's the steeple, open the door and see all the
Oh,
people.
yes.
That's what the top of it all of a sudden reminded me of.
Huh.
And I started to laugh for like 20 minutes looking at this painting. So it became a little bit, I guess, lost the title, Nuntius, with kind of the confining rope, and it became a little bit more religious and Catholic for me, which I'm a former Catholic. It was also around the time that the Pope was ill. So it finally came together with kind of those representing for me the people in the church, the binding ropes, and then the Eucharist and the chalice, and then the vestments with the cloth underneath. Not that it necessarily reads that way, but that was the chuckle I got from it, and it made it that much more important than when I got to the bottom half of it to really make it right. And doing it in oils, I used to work in acrylics for about 8 or 10 years, and it's much more difficult, I find, doing acrylics than working in oils. But again, here we go, coming back to the cloth that's in the piece itself, that I think really starts to set things off. It's not a bad grouping there.
No, it looks great.
I love the way you hung the show too. You guys do a fantastic job. It's
Well,
really,
thank you.
it's really, really great. Snow scenes are a thing that I love to do. I wish I could do more, but we don't get that much snow anymore in New Jersey. So this one was the black ice. This one, and when we get to the next one, and even the fourth one down the wall, it's the same home. This was out in Elmer, New Jersey, and we don't get that much snow. So I went out in this huge blizzard. It was about 10 degrees, 5 degrees. It was horrible. And I knew where I wanted to go to see this place, to see if I could get a painting out of it. So I went down there and I just started taking reference photos of what was going on. And I'll go back and do little studies when it gets warmer. And I had before, so I've been looking at this house for about 2 or 3 years. And it's just this lonely road that comes down. And I'm always fascinated by these homes. What's the story? Who used to live here? They're abandoned. And it's like the windows, the eyes of that soul of the house looking out at you, kind of calling you in to take a look. But I never go too close because I'm always afraid to go on someone else's property unless I have permission. So this was just from down the road, but it was really about the snow. And I wanted to really try to make that work in this painting, and that cold feeling in the sky and the bare tree. I love the bare trees. I like bare trees better in the winter than I like to paint trees in the summertime. They're too full. I just think that gives you the character of these kind of trees when you see them in the bones. So this one was kind of fun to do. And again, making changes, because if you look at that house and you go to when we get to the next one, I made a lot of changes on the one at the end as well. But that's kind of the same area. It's about a mile away. There's an old farm that's near that one, still down there near Elmer. And a lot of this is just looking across the field, and I had snow blowing all over me and the drifts and all of this. It was kind of interesting, and snow plows coming at me on this lonely road. And I just love the snow on top of these barns. It's just gorgeous. Now the road that's going in the front of the painting, that's what I'm talking about. You're making changes and making things that seem to work. It was just really a field of snow going all the way across, and I felt it was important to change that so that it broke up all of that white that was coming across the front, which actually helps you stop and then see the building. You go back to the farm that's back there. But I think the challenge is really trying to get the feeling of that cold day. And I thought that one was fairly successful when I was working on it. That's the same house as the first one, but a little bit closer coming up to it. And I've taken away some windows that didn't belong. And I was more fascinated by the shadows that were on it. So it was really from the same day. I just wanted to do a closer view of it. And then removing trees and putting in trees and putting in other branches, creating atmosphere, opening things up because you couldn't quite see through the two buildings there really well. But again, it's my love of snow, doing snow scenes that I wish I could spend more time doing, more in a place that actually had more snow. And I find it hard sometimes in New Jersey to find scenes that I actually like anyway. You really have to search and search and search. But that's what I've always said. I mean, it's the one statement that I have too is that I'm not really choosing the subjects; they're choosing me, and I just happen upon them. And I think that's what happens when you're really looking around and trying to find something. And there's just something about an allure that just pulls you into that's something that I should paint. That one's a place I've done this over and over and over again. Um, and this was Long Gone, I think is the title on there. There were these two bait shacks down by Ocean City, and they were off the island. And I turned down this tiny little road, and I just came around the corner, and there they were. So that I spent the day doing some small watercolors, some sketches of it, and I did take photos, but I didn't get to it for till years later. It was in one of my sketchbooks, and I opened the sketchbook one day, and I think I've done 3 different versions of this. This is the third and the newest one, and I just love the remoteness of it. I love the white buildings that are in it, kind of the silence and remote area that it's in. Again, I assumed that they were bait shacks at one point. Um, that's what they seem to be. That's on one of those back channels over there near Ocean City across I guess is it I forget where the next town over is, but a couple miles off the island. And we used to go down there for our summers, so I was fairly familiar with the area long before I started to paint. One of the interesting things is that I was thinking about was the paintings from Maine and being drawn to that area. And I didn't even realize this, just a quick story, that when we went up to like these pieces up in Port Clyde, I went over to the lighthouse over there, and I'd done another painting of the lighthouse, not the lighthouse itself, but the buildings, the structures behind it. And when we got done with the trip, I went back to my nieces. And when I was younger, I had done a copy of a painting my mom had done because she dabbled in art. And it was of the Port Clyde lighthouse. And I never realized it till I went back to my nieces and she has the painting hanging on her wall. And I was like, oh, it's like comes full circle, going all the way around. And could be one of the reasons I was really subconsciously drawn to up there.
Well, Phil, it's a really wonderful show. Thank you.
Thank you. We kind of got this light coming in from this one window. Might have to shift here a little bit. I don't know.
In your studio.
Yes, I'm in my studio right at the moment. I'll turn this light around. Maybe we'll get some more light on that. It doesn't work very well. Yeah, the sun just went down, going down at my window behind me. So yeah, I was upstairs. It was the quietest place to be, where the dog wasn't going to bother me, and no one was going to be having a conversation or running in and out.
Mhm.
So
Looks like you're in the top of the house.
yes, it's all the way in the attic. Yeah, I've painted in a lot of places, basements, everywhere. I'm sure like you have as well. You know.
Right, every nook and cranny.
Yes.
Well, the show's up through the 29th. We hope people come down to check it out. And everything's also available on our website, ceruleanarts.com. So thanks so much, Phil, for being here and have a great night.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Michael. I'll say hi to Tina. I know she's behind the camera there, so we'll say hello to her as well.